You are tuned in to the PBE podcast where we're taking new information, applying it to new real world applications to make discoveries. We got to stop and take a minute and thank our sponsors, BRT Energy Advisors, Better Reservoir Technologies, results without the BS. We've had Alan on our show, and I can tell you from experience, he definitely has seen seismic from around the world, including, of course, right here in the Permian Basin. If you are in the E&P business and you want to use seismic data to increase the value of your assets, or if you want to drill safer wells at lower costs using seismic, then you got to get a hold of Alan Bertain and work with his team at BRT Energy Advisors. If you check out our podcast from episode 70, you'll see that not only he understands geophysics, business, and people, but he also explains complicated subjects in a clear and simple way. Visit them at www.brtenergy.com/PBE.
Three, two, one.
Let's
go!
Oh, yes! I'm to the PBE podcast. Troy Tittlemeyer, joined by none other, of course, this Matt the Skip Scipione, and the PBE podcast. We have Mike Rains joining us today, 21 years and continuing to build that career and sustain this career. And an it's just a fantastic show, in my opinion. I love the man. He was a huge inspiration for me as a professional, a young professional going into society. He's trying to figure things out. We talk about it in the show. But before then, Skip, catch us up, man. PhD? Are you kidding me? I want to know what did you learn last week,
dude? Just diving into more and more for me, where I feel like I'm the weakest, and that's the isotopic dating and the different methodologies, and where you can see positives and where you see negatives when you're doing uranium zircon dating, specifically in like different sedimentary rocks. But yeah, just having my mind blown, right? Because for me, like my background, a lot of petroleum, seismic structure, and so this whole area, like the geochrome field, is just brand new to me, and it's just all these different terms and just kind of diving into all of that. But it's been a blast, man. I mean, just
cool.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Sounds like
age dating, sedimentary rocks. I mean, that's new. That's new concept, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's for more of like a provenance purpose, right? So you're understanding, okay, the provenance for this specific sandstone, right? Or is this, from an orogenic event, like this mountain that was over here, or is this something that's being recycled through time? Like, oh, this is actually, a sandstone that existed that got re-eroded and redeposited here, and like being able to tell by the different grains, or is this like proximal volcanics that were close by and all this other stuff? And it's just like, what really makes these different formations? And then when you talk about the bottom up process, how does that change the whole thing as well? So it's like, oh, we're getting some like weird clinochlor crystals in here. What's going on with that? Like that shouldn't have been there. So
fascinating, man. Absolutely fascinating. I'm always excited to hear and catch up. We usually do it just on the shows with where the PhD's going, man. Man. Just evaluating this bit. You get the whole basin from basement to surface, right? That's
yep. Yeah, just a huge area. And right now, like I said, it's more just background work for me before I really start. I mean, I've looked at the data, but I need to understand, the geology of the study area before I start, any kind of high level interpretation at all.
What's the name of the basin again?
The Eromanga Basin.
Eromanga.
Yeah, it's part of the Great Artesian Basin in like Queensland, Australia. So so basically Northeast Australia. It is gigantic, but that's kind of the beauty of it, man. It's just, instead of focusing down on one little area, the area, it just keeps expanding and expanding. So
wow.
Start
interpreting from the moon and make your way in.
Exactly. Think big and then go small. That's the way I like to interpret.
Well, I'm not,
dude, what's going on with you, dude? You're in Texas. You're looking at wells. You're doing all kinds of fun things over there.
Yeah, heading back to Texas here pretty soon. I got picked up a lease, starting a little oil and gas company, and yes, very, very interesting. I love the smell of it. I love the idea that you really do get to listen to the reservoir. You get to you're just it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Wish I had more rock data and all that stuff, but I'm starting to get familiar with the area, the other operators. I mean, it's definitely a very interesting development. Professionally, just everything about starting your own company and doing all that, dealing with the Railroad Commission. everything about it has been very, very interesting. But then I come back to Arizona, I'm staking claims. I was going to say, I'm not a physical guy. Like if you work out every day, you squat houses for fun. I don't do that kind of stuff. I like to sit in front of the computer, challenge myself intellectually to the nth degree, and I don't really work out. So I had to stake claims 2 days ago. I freaking sore, man.
How's the back doing? Back's
holding up. Back's holding up. So
okay.
There's a positive in there.
There is a positive there. There's a positive. It's a good soreness. It's a good soreness this time.
Oh, dude. It was something else. We had a quad. We were staking. I mean, I brought my dad out with me. Fascinating, man. Copper, molybdenum play. Just incredible geology. Seeing it, staking it. Man, having a lot of fun in the mining industry too, and learning a ton about that whole side of geology. Just pushing forward, man. But we have Mike Raines today.
On
legend. A legend from the Permian Basin. Born in the Permian Basin, is that correct?
No, not born in the Permian Basin. Born in the Panhandle.
Yeah.
Just north. Right. I forgot about that. We were close. The last show we were talking about how many people have been on this show. Have you thought of a number yet, Skips? I mean, we need to track this down.
We need to track this. I'll go through the archives. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. I was pretty impressed with somebody born in Slayton. On the show.
You knew that was. Well, Mr. Raines, welcome to the PBE podcast. And let's talk about the show. What dropped out for you, sir, from this show? What are you excited about the most for 2021, 2022? We're pushing forward post-COVID. Where are you at? How's everything going?
Now, from the society side, I'm most excited about the new developments that are going to stay with us thanks to COVID, like having online options for people, being able to have remote access. If you're out on a well site and you missed this lunch and talk, maybe you didn't miss it. Maybe you can get on that rig Wi-Fi, and hopefully it'll be enough bandwidth that you can get in and watch the society events live.
Right.
Or if you can get them recorded later. So from the society side, I'm really excited about something that we developed because we had to, mother necessity. Things came about because we had to have them about. And now those are going to be good for us in the future. They're going to make access easier. I don't think they're going to detract from our in-person situations, because you really don't get the full networking like Skip's talking about, that you miss that with the online, but you can still have that and have the best of both worlds by getting something recorded or being remotely accessing things. So negative from the COVID is going to turn out to be a positive for everybody in the future on that, at least on that aspect.
Yep.
Yeah. From the industry side and the carbon capture, use, and storage, I'm excited about the changes in the tax code that I think are going to lead to more easy to implement programs. And so I think we'll see an expansion of CCS and CCUS as we learn how to navigate all these issues and to bring together emitters, transporters, compressors, and storage sites, and hopefully use sites also, so that CO2 is not just wasted by being shoved in the ground, but we get something from it also, and then keep it in the ground for later.
Fantastic. Skippo, what'd you get? What dropped out for you?
I was gonna say, for me, my favorite part of the show was Mike going into his professional history and talking about what he was doing with Kinder Morgan and Whiting, and then specifically when you were talking and you broke down the operations of not only a CO2 flood, but what is happening with the CO2 at a reservoir scale, explaining the differences between oil wet and water wet, and then breaking down actually how that CO2 is scrubbing that oil from the rock in an oil wet reservoir, even though it's not only applied in oil wet systems, as you mentioned. But yeah, this show was a blast. And then especially talking about the societies and how they've been evolving, forced to evolve because of COVID. But like you said, these changes are actually all for the positive in the long run. Right now, we're giving people more options to be a member, to be part of the community, right? Just because, you're not physically in Midland doesn't mean that you can't be attending these luncheons, like so and so forth going forward.
Yeah. And as you guys probably know, we have a lot of our membership in the 2 local societies in Midland that actually live in Houston, and some that live in New Orleans or Baton Rouge, or
Mm-hmm.
and then a few that live scattered out beyond that, Kansas, California, even back east, a few. So they have been isolated from being able to participate in all the luncheons and things unless they make a special trip out to Midland. So this is going to be something that would help ease that, and you don't have to come out here physically anymore. You can still participate and stay at home at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if I can't, if you don't mind me throwing in a little plug here, you both talked about topics that we've had at PBS SEPM this year. In December, we had a Zircon dating talk, and that one's free out there on the web. You can go look at it for nothing. That's
I'm looking it up right now.
University of Texas at Arlington talk. And then in March, we had Casey Mitchell, who you guys might know. I bet you for sure, Troy, know him. He talked about going from college student to independent operator in a short time. I guess that was last month. Yeah, last month. So 2 topics for 2 of you that came up in the same interview. So
There's absolutely.
We didn't plan that, right, guys?
Yeah,
that's right.
Not planned at all.
That's right. It's the magic of getting together. It's the magic of getting even virtually. I want to start with just an appreciation. I want to thank you, Mike Rains, for having an impact on my career as a young professional. I didn't know where I was doing, what I was going, and nothing. But you were always so easy to be approached to and speak with, and that was huge for me. I really do have a great memory, and I look forward to staying connected and continuing on with you as a professional and as a friend. So thank you for joining the show and doing this with us. I had a great time. I have 3 things. Try to keep focused here. The first one is about the societies and about this post-COVID thing. I've always said, stay connected. You got to stay connected to the young professionals or to the grad students. And when you have an opportunity now to visit a live luncheon and you can ask questions, you got to engage. So if you can't physically be there, and people have talked about how, dude, I went and did mud logging and it took me away from the community. Well, now post COVID, that's not necessarily the case. You can still make good money mud logging, be out there on location, and still make the talk and engage in the talk. You have to make a presence. You have to raise your hand. You have to be uncomfortable, but your name will get recognized. You will be recognized. Your curiosity will be appreciated no matter what. I love that. And he made a very good point about the societies after COVID and what's to come there. It gives us more opportunity to engage. So I love that. The business of carbon capture and carbon use, I think that's creating incredible amount of jobs, regulatory jobs for the engineers, the geophysicists, the geologists, geoscientists. I think that's fascinating. I love that there's a positive thing going on there, opportunity and inspiration and alignment. That's fantastic to hear. And then the third thing that I had that Skips was talking about is really this physics and chemistry of changing the interfacial tension in the reservoir with the CO2 flooding. What exactly is happening there? I get a feeling that it's some kind of quantum physics going on. You are changing interfacial tension of this fluid. So if you don't mess with it, it reacts one way. If you mess with it, it starts acting a totally different way, but very predictive. It's always going to change interfacial tension. Why is that happening? What is the chemistry? What is the physics there? How can we better develop this idea with new modern concepts and modern geologic context? I mean, I'm fascinated with this, and I'm totally going to stay glued to you and the carbon story. How do people stay connected with you? What's the easiest way? Is it through your website, your company, LinkedIn? How do we stay connected with Mike Rains?
Probably LinkedIn is the easiest way. I do have my email contact on the Permian Basin section, sepm.org website, so you can look it up there if you like email better. But LinkedIn probably is the easiest, most convenient one.
The plotter. Okay, so
yeah, the plotter story.
Yeah, this will little context behind this. I fly into Midland. I'm staying with Troy because knew Troy from undergrad. I got into UTPB for graduate school, and I wasn't sure yet. I didn't know if this was gonna be my first choice. I was still looking at some other schools. I don't know if this was the first or the second day. I want to say it was this. I want
I
to say
think it was the first day. I think you hadn't even
I think it was the first
got
day.
off.
So I landed in Midland International, and I
Uh-huh.
will refer to it as Midland International. Troy picks me up. Yeah. Troy goes on and goes to tell me, hey, I got to run and do this thing real quick, but I need you to help out a friend of mine move this giant printer out of this building. And I was just like, okay, like, is this how things usually go here? Are we all just moving printers around? And it turns out, get dropped off at the building, and lo and behold, first other geo I meet in Midland is the legend Mike Rains, as we struggle to get a plotter wedged into this elevator out into the lobby. It was it was quite an experience, but that was the first time we met.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm sure you were like, I don't know who this kid is. I don't know what's going on, but he's here to help me. I trust Troy, but
Well, I don't know. I didn't know if I trusted Troy because I just he didn't show up. It's been somebody else. And
Delegator.
yeah, delegator. That was your first foray into management, right,
Yeah.
Troy?
Yeah.
Then we are officially entering the conception part of the PBE podcast with Mr. Mike Rains. And Skippo, I say this with confidence and without reservation. Mike Rains is a legend of the Permian Basin. When I showed up, he was one of the first guys I met. He was instantly a mentor in how the societies work and kind of understanding what your role is as a professional to support the society, how you get into it. Why would you even get into it? We've had great conversations at these different events, and we go to the Southwest section meeting in January every year and listen to that, the talk that the WTGS and Southwest section put together in Abilene every year. Like that was always, it was
the Bill Haley, right? Memorial Short Course.
Bill Haley Memorial Short Course, right?
Oh, that's the best one, man. That's my favorite short course. Out of all the short courses I've been to, the one with Postman-Tier was still the best short course I've ever been to.
I'm sure. Well, we're glad to hear that. And that's one that changes every year. So you can't just go back in the next January and catch it again. So you got to catch them when they come around.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. And it's evolving. The science is evolving. The technology is evolving. The engineering is evolving. The targets are evolving. If you're not present at these events and in these conventions, you are not present. You're thinking of something else, and you might be stuck in a rut. You need to get out. You need to be involved in these societies because it's always there's always some new perspective and new ideas and all the conversations. So I was instantly tied into, whoa, what is this society stuff? How does this help me as a professional? And then I realized, I'm like, well, obviously it's because of all these different perspectives and all the different, every meeting, every talk is always something very interesting at these conventions. And so it's worth its weight in gold and investing your time and attention and even your money into the local societies to help sustain that and provide a place where we can go as geoscientists to challenge new ideas and just catch up with old friends. And we're doing it virtually, Mr. Rains. And another thing that happens, go ahead.
For the most part. We can talk about that in a minute.
Yes. Another thing that happens is you don't always get a great opportunity to go, how did it go for you? How did you start? Where did you get your degree? What was your first few jobs as your 21-year ongoing career that you're in? How did that all happen? Now we get the chance to do it. And I'm excited for this moment. I'm excited to go down into the details and listen to your story, Mr. Rains. Please.
And not to cut you off and not to cut you off either, Mike, but to also reiterate, this is those luncheons, those conferences, all those things that we went to is kind of what birthed this podcast in the first place, right? That's where we developed our relationships with the other professionals in Midland. And then that's where we grew our networking circle, was through these different events that was thrown on. And I know, Mike, you were basically there at every event I went to. And just being a staple and being that, more or less being one of those foundational members for all of these different societies in Midland was humongous. And yeah, not to cut you off, but
Perfectly so. Where did the school start? Where did your geology love start? Where did the young professional career take you? Let's listen to this.
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't know it originally. It took me a while to find geology as a official college degree that you could get. My college career started off as a music major, but my geology interest, when I think back about it now, goes back to as young as I can remember. I always liked to play in the garden. We lived out in the country. We had a big garden. We had a rock driveway. So I'm always picking up rocks, busting them in incorrect ways, digging in the garden, making dams, diverting the water flow to this plant and that plant, try to change the way the system works in there and just playing around with it. Now I know that was geology, but at the time I was just playing in the mud and in the dirt and finding cool rocks in the driveway.
Well, thank you, Mom and Dad, for allowing you to play in the rocks.
Yes. Yeah. So once I got into college, though, music major, music education, I just couldn't quite find my niche that fit exactly right. So I ended up, I've been in here a long time. I don't have a degree. Where am I going with this? Oh, what the heck? I'll just get a general studies degree. So, you have to have some extra science. Well, what sciences do I want? I already had chemistry. I've already had a biology. What's this one? It's a survey of earth sciences. Dr. Savelle. I'll take that. I'll take that with Dr. Savelle and see how it goes. I love that class. We had meteorology, oceanography, geology, geography.
Wow.
And it all just made sense. It was easy to understand and to learn. Some of the people around me were saying, gosh, this is so hard. Why is this? I can't understand these concepts. But to me, it was like, yes, this stuff all fits. It makes perfect sense. So next semester, I found out they have scholarships in the geology program. Oh yes. So sign me up. I'm on to that. So that's how I got started into geology as my, third or fourth junior year, something like that.
Oh. Kind of similar. I started, end of sophomore year. So my last 2 years of undergrad, I switched from Dr. Osteopathy to geology. Way better. So tell me about the country. You said you grew up in the country. Specifically, what part of the country? And then your undergrad, was that OU or was that just master's at OU?
Master's was at OU. Undergrad was West Texas State University at the time. Now it's West Texas A&M. And that happened the year I graduated. That was the transition. So my degree actually says West Texas State University, a division of Texas A&M. So it was in the transitional period there. So undergrad was at West Texas State, and I grew up in that area. That's in Canyon, outside of Amarillo, and I grew up in Pampa, east of Amarillo.
Wow.
So another little geology tie-in with that area is that there's some canyons out maybe a mile from my parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid back then, you could ride your bike around pretty freely without too much worry. And there weren't as many trucks driving 90 miles an hour down a country road. So I had access to those canyons through a couple county roads and our main road. So I like to spend some time driving up and down to what I now know are lease roads. To me, back then, they were just dirt roads. But now I recognize that those are lease roads.
Wow.
And they're just fascinating to see all the layers. Sorry.
So
Paladuro Basin is where all that activity's up there with Amarillo involved, or is that Granite Wash with the Anadarko?
That's the Granite Wash in that particular area up there. This is Gray County, Paladuro Canyon's a couple counties south.
Okay.
But this is all part of the same bigger system.
Cool. Skippo?
I was going to say, so you finish your undergrad at quote unquote West Texas A&M, and then now when was that transition immediate to OU, or was it, you took like a gap year, try to figure it out? Because I know for me, I knew I loved geology, but I didn't know what route I wanted to take, and that's what kind of led me to West Texas. But for you, was it immediate, or did you have to sit back and think about it for a while?
Well, because of the way I started and the way classes fell, I was graduating in December and couldn't really start the program until August at grad school at University of Oklahoma. So I took that semester to do some leveling courses, get a few things that were missing that they required that we didn't require or that I knew could transfer, and took a few classes in that interim, that spring semester, and then started in the fall with everybody else at OU. So I looked at a few courses or a few options around, and they were all good options. None of them were lower quality than the other necessarily. I just felt like that one fit me and fit my lifestyle a little better, and wasn't so far from home. Going to the next state over was closer than going to some of the in-state schools. And they were able to balance that cost difference by giving me some TA programs and RA options.
Was it already?
I'm sorry. That's just crazy to think about. Just going a state over is closer than going to other schools in state. Just the size of Texas. It just still blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, here's some trivia for you along those lines, since I'm from the Amarillo area. Amarillo is closer to 6 other state capitals than it is to Austin.
What the?
Yeah.
That's a fun trivia question.
That is a fun.
Wow.
That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
6 other states?
Yeah, 6 other states.
Wow.
So, yeah. Okay.
Was it already the ConocoPhillips geology and geophysics at that time, or did that come later?
It was that was later, but in that general time frame, not long after that.
And
I believe that was maybe 90, 95 or 96, and I was graduating by the end of 95.
Wow, exciting, man. And you were going in, you knew oil and gas was going to be the route coming out of OU?
No, had no idea. All of my electives and all of my engineering required courses were all focused toward environmental or water resources, because this is coming into the mid 90s by the time I'm graduating. Texaco here in Midland, for example, hadn't hired anyone in 7 years in geology, and it had been 3 or 4 years since that one hire before they'd hired other people. So I had no idea, no concept, and not a significant amount of interest that oil and gas would be something that would make a career for me. Instead, I was thinking it was water resources, and maybe waste disposal management, something like that.
Wow.
So,
well, Texaco's the first gig, right? You get hired by Texaco.
I got a summer internship with Texaco, and that was summer '95. And by the end of the internship, I had maybe written 3 pages on my dissertation. So they came to me about mid-August and said, you know what, we like your work. We would be willing to offer you a position, but you haven't finished your thesis, so we really can't do anything with you right now. So between then and October, I wrote 160 more pages to finish up my thesis, and went to work for them at about Halloween in '95.
Wow.
So it's all about motivation and time. I didn't have anything else to do. I could work on writing a thesis for 8 hours a day at that point.
What was the thesis on?
Low temperature gypsum dissolution kinetics. And
What?
then it had one chapter on de-dolotomization, which is when you have dolomite existing and you get the right fluid conditions, you can actually dissolve the dolomite and
Right.
precipitate out different,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That fits with the Permian Basin. We have not only the gypsum, right, in the northwest shelf, or the eastern shelf for sure, is a gypsum funny little thing going on there. The oil's working its way around the gypsum, it seems like, and you want to get in there and in those pockets and find it. But then you're talking about dissolving dolomite with the right brine, I'm guessing, the right water.
More fresh water. I mean, fresher than what we drink here in Midland anyway. You remember that.
Whoa. So it unlocks the magnesium and calcium and release some CO2 when you hit it with fresh water?
You know what? It's been so long. That's 20 something years ago that I have to go back and reread my own thesis to remember what we were looking at back then.
Well, what's interesting about the gypsum I remember from the Eastern Shell, not to spin off into something that doesn't really matter, but it does, because the Eastern Shells are a prolific reservoir. The gypsum was it was almost a depth sweet spot thing, right? And a little bit deep, you don't get it, you start shallowing up, all of a sudden gypsum pops in.
Yeah, about, if I remember right, about 3,000 feet or so, your gypsum gets converted into anhydrite. So it just loses the water. And then that saves so many problems on your log interpretation with the false readings that the water that's locked in the calcium sulfate causes on the logging analysis.
Whoa, interesting. Where does the water go, you think, from the gypsum to anhydrite process?
Yeah, it's physically, where's it going? Or you mean
it's fresh water, right? That's breaking off that transition.
Yeah, it's just compressed and heated out of the rock. So it's there in the formation. It's just migrating. It's just like dewatering of a shell, but with a different cause.
Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. Cool. So that fits.
All that migrated off. Now it's not there anymore.
So you got Texaco giving you the opportunity. You finish your thesis. It seems like you're definitely ready to apply some things to the Permian Basin. Is that where Texaco takes you right away?
Yes, that's where they took me right away. My first project, my intern project, which I did a little bit more on as my first actual project, was looking at the Drinkard Formation in New Mexico. That's just below Tubb. Equivalent or Clear Fork equivalent in Texas.
Gosh, I'm thinking of the other ones above it that are real juicy for Concho for many years. What's right above the Tubb and all that?
The Blindberry, Glorieta.
Yeah, Blindberry Paddock.
Mm-hmm.
Baby. Wow.
Yep.
Okay, so you got the Guads right there to help you with
Marble Reef. Yeah.
Mountains down there, has a little bit of Tubb and all that stuff. So you got outcomes to work with. You got an objective. What did you get into as a young geologist? What was your responsibility?
Well, that's funny that you should mention that. So the Drinkard field that I'm working on is in Vacuum Field, which is in central Lee County, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And after I'd been there maybe 6 or 7 months, my mentor, his name is Roger Cole, he moved to Houston to work on the Sichuan Basin in China. So there's 13 stacked horizons in this interval. We're in not a hiring freeze, but a slow hiring situation. So I had 13 horizons, 13 fields stacked together, thrown at me until we could get somebody else in there. And here I am, just graduated, 6-month experience, don't know what I'm doing.
Fresh off an internship.
Drive my way to the field. But it was a great experience because I learned a lot.
I was going to say, right into the fire. I mean, those are the situations where for me, I feel like that's where you learn the most when you don't want to be under that stress all the time, but when you're thrown into those situations, then all of a sudden you could start finding correlations a lot faster because you're so ingrained in all that data.
Yes. Yeah. You see it all, and you have the work from people before you to compare and contrast. Look, everybody agrees on this, so maybe that's something that I can be pretty confident in. I'll start with that and work your way from there. Get to see the cores. Troy, I know that you know Emily Stout. Skip, I don't know, did you ever get to meet Emily?
Oh yeah.
She became my mentor on the core analysis and on production in general, and couldn't ask for a more in-depth, deep understanding. She scared the crap out of me, of course, but as a new hire. But Emily was one of the best things that happened to my career.
Wow.
To train me up.
Wow. I share in that statement with you, Mr. Rains. She was the first person I met from UTPB, and she was so huge in the development of me going to the Permian Basin, and the rest is history. Love that lady. So
here's some more trivia for you. She was one of the key players, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but she was one of the key players in the development of what is now the Permian Basin section of SEPM, new hire, intern, a young professional field trip that goes out annually, which I don't know if either one of you got to participate in one of those in the years that you were here, but it's a really amazing program. And some of the roots of that come from the work that Emily did with Susan Longacre when they were both Texaco EPDD, which is their exploration and production technology division. So that's a research group.
Wow.
So those two, and they combined, of course, with Bob Trenum and the things that he had been doing at Gulf and Chevron, and Robert Campbell, and they brought all that stuff together. But I don't want to get too much into what's to come later, but that's the roots. And that's some of the people that I was able to be influenced by early on in my career. And seeing all these connections and having the chance to learn from all of these people, it was really, really great for me.
Wow. We hear this often, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but it was like the first few years of boots on the ground and really diving in. That is like the platform for the rest of your career. What you learn and what you get into in the first few years is that's where you really apply that, and you just dive through the rest of your career with that. Is that true with you?
Yeah, I think that's true. And the mindsets that you get while you're doing that, things that you are capable of, things that you're not capable of in your own mind, kind of get set with that. And if you're thrown into something that you don't even know what you can handle and can't handle, so you just try it, and you have guidance from people to give you some confidence and to point you in the right direction. That's one of the key things. So mentors, mentoring, and being mentored, those all are what connects this and helps you build that foundation and makes your life a lot easier if you get that. Wow. And I will have to say for Texaco, that was one of the best things about working for Texaco is I got to see a wide variety of technologies, tests, application, research, and cooperation.
Wow.
Whenever I came into the oil industry, I had this idea that you have your Texaco over here, you have your Exxon over there, you have your Shell here, and no one works with each other and no one does anything, and everyone is kept siloed from each other. But when I actually got here, oh no, you have a lease line project with Exxon, you have a joint venture with Shell, you have all these things where everyone does have to work together.
Yeah.
And so that was not what my impression was coming into the oil industry. So that's one thing that I can say. We may keep secrets from each other, but we're also able to work together too.
Wow. Right on. All right. You get through Texaco and you start transitioning. Your next step is Kinder Morgan. How did that happen? Sandridge to Whiting for so many years. And if I'm correct on, and I was going to say this in the beginning, this idea where you go to the societies, you get to meet them, you kind of hear, you go, Mike Raines, of course, I always see him, I always meet with him, I always talk to him. But you end up hearing about other people's careers from other people, it seems like sometimes. And so you start hearing, oh yeah, Raines was a CO2 flood and carbonates. And, you start hearing that. This is the first time I get to hear it from you. How does that transition, several different companies, 21 years ongoing career, take us through that?
Yeah, so let's see. So at Texaco, the transition to, well, you have to understand one other thing before this. When I first came to Texaco on that Queen project, I was working with an engineer who was getting close to retirement age. His name's Charles Wally. And Charles told me a very wise thing. He said, look around at all these people that you see. All these faces will be the same. It's just the names above their door that will change. And that has been true my whole career, starting with this Texaco transition. So by the time I left Texaco, we had moved from everything was strictly asset team based to a combination of the CO2 floods being in a group while still associated with their asset teams. So my engineer, my reservoir engineer that was working on the CO2 group with me in my old North Hobbs asset team, also transitioned to Kinder Morgan. So we went together over to Kinder Morgan to start working on the SACROC project, which at that time, it was experiencing a transition from Pennzoil to Penn's Energy to Devon. And Devon wasn't really in the CO2 business. They're mainly at that time a gas company. And this was something that wasn't really in their core competency. They didn't think so. They were willing to get rid of it. Kinder Morgan was the pipeline provider for CO2 to the Sac Rock unit. So they were in a situation where their number one customer is suddenly someone who's not focused on what they do, and it may or may not impact their sales. So they decided to make an offer to Devon and took over the Sac Rock unit.
Wow.
So Scott and I joined them to help get that off the ground from the Kinder Morgan perspective.
Yeah.
And to modernize the way they were doing the CO2 flood and try to expand it.
Yeah. Improve
Quick
that
highlight
infrastructure, make it more efficient.
Yes.
Yeah.
And change the flooding process itself.
Yeah.
Change the flooding process itself. We're talking about sending gas, CO2 gas, into the reservoir, right? It's not a liquid.
Right. Now, I guess I should talk about why you would even want to do that. So, and what it's called. So that's enhanced oil recovery. Has a couple different things. So primary production, that's when you first discover a field and you produce it using its own energy.
Yep.
At some point, that energy has dissipated and you can't get the oil and gas to the surface anymore under its own power. So you do something, which typically is water flooding. So that's secondary recovery. So, and then at some point, your water cut gets so high that you can't afford to lift the oil and lift all that water with it and re-inject the water and handle it all, dispose of it, whatever you have to do with it. So at that point, you move to what's called tertiary production. So enhanced oil recovery falls in that tertiary category. And there's several different things that encompass EOR. But one of those things is CO2 injection. So how CO2 injection works is you pump the CO2 in the ground, and when it's above a certain temperature and pressure, it becomes like a fluid. It doesn't have all the properties of fluid, but it's not properties of a gas either.
Like a vapor, condensate of some kind?
A condensate, you can actually pump it when it's at the right temperature and pressure. And of course, the higher the temperature is, the higher the pressure has to be to compensate for that. And the lower the temperature is, the less that pressure has to be. But when you're dealing with the reservoir, something under 3,500 feet, say, you can have that gas be in its liquid form. And when you pump that liquid gas into the reservoir, it does a couple of things. It swells the oil that it contacts. So that, of course, makes it take more space, which means it's got to flow because it can't stay in the same space at a bigger size. And it strips off the light ends. And as long as you have that.
The light end hydrocarbons, is that what you said? But the light.
The lighter ends of the hydrocarbon strings.
Wow.
So you can move that oil a lot easier now. And the third key thing that it does there is, you know how oil and water don't mix and you get the significant barrier between them. When you have CO2 present and it's in the miscible phase, that means it's in the liquid phase, and it can be a single fluid with the oil and water that are in the reservoir. Then it wipes out that superficial or interfacial tension. And so the oil can now suddenly move freer also. So you have a variety of mechanisms that help you move the oil that was stuck and get it out and move it on over to your producers.
So Mike, not to cut you off again, but can you, because I want to hear it from you, can you define the difference between a reservoir that is oil wet versus a reservoir that is water wet for our listeners?
I think the simplest thing is to think about what's actually in contact with the rock itself. If you have a dry rock and you put the first fluid that it's contacting with right up against that, is that oil or water? If it's oil, then that's an oil wet system. And that means that oil coats the entire inside of this lining. And so that means that oil is going to flow a certain way in there. And if you have it all with water contacting it, then water is the preferential fluid, and things are flowing relative to what that water will allow. So that's the simplest way for me to think about it.
You want water wet rock.
Yeah.
Which is the most common.
Yeah. So can you also explain that how like you're saying, the CO2 itself can help scrub that oil wet rock? So essentially that oil that's, captured in the pores and these little divots within, these grains in the subsurface, how can the CO2 help free that oil?
Okay, well, let's back up 1 second. So
Okay.
this is not a process just for oil wet reservoirs.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the reservoirs that are used with CO2 flooding are actually water wet. But the idea is still the same. You have a partial pore space and you have some oil in here, but this rim is all, I guess I should do it this way. This rim is all water.
Yep.
So this oil is not very mobile. It's got all the interfacial tension in here. When you put the CO2 in there with it, suddenly these two become one unit and they all flow as one. So if volumetrically it was 50% oil, 50% water, but only the water would move before, now you can move both of them together as a single unit. So
that's awesome. I think that was the best explanation I've ever had for CO2 flooding versus oil wet. I mean, I always hear these overcomplicated explanations for, how CO2 flooding works, but I think the way that you just broke it down, in its core, you attacked all the primary, not issues with it, but the primary points and topics that needed to be addressed. So that was great. Thank you for doing that, Mike.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway. I know, Troy, I see your brain. I see your the wheels turning.
I thought you were going to say you see his brain smoking there for a second.
Yeah. That might happen in a second if we keep watching.
Changing tension of the fluid in the reservoir. I heard something recently about how when you decrease the interfacial tension, it destroys microbial bacteria in the system. It just kills them. They don't like that. They like high interfacial tension. Microbes will just cruise around. Mars cells are happy, or whatever that takes for that microbe system to work. When you decrease that, the microbes seem to die, which seems like a cool thing.
Yeah, and I suspect, I don't know, I haven't looked at this. This is the first time I've really thought about it is here live. And probably Steve Melzer is the real one you should talk to about that question. But I would imagine that it's a lot easier for them to cruise along that inner surface break in between the water and oil. And when you break that down, they're floating out, and it's a lot harder for them to get around to access the things that they need from each system.
Right. Yeah.
So that's my first guess. Just thinking about this live as we talk here, and having no experience and no background.
It is awesome to think about biology and rocks in the same thing. That's
yeah, it is.
So Mike, not to backtrack a lot, but so you're in this transition with Kinder Morgan buying out the Sac Rock field, and now you're converting it to a more optimal CO2 flooding system. So continue with your story. So what happens next? What's going on?
Okay. So we spend 6 years, or at least I spent 6 years there at Kinder Morgan. And we took this Sac Rock unit from, I don't remember the exact numbers, 3,000 or 4,000 barrels of oil a day to eventually peak out at over 36,000 barrels of oil per day. So that's a pretty good success. And I think even still today, they're over 25,000 barrels a day. So this was literally a field that was on its last leg. And here's another little trivia for you that I love about the Sac Rock unit. It is not only the first commercial CO2 flood in the United States, it's also the first anthropogenic CO2 or CCUS project, carbon capture use and storage.
Wow.
They started in 1972 they started the commercial aspects, not the pilots, not the testing. The actual commercial flood started in 1972 with CO2 that they brought up from gas plants down in the Val Verde Basin, and stripped the CO2 off of those gas plants, which had a high CO2 cut, and they were previously venting the CO2. And they took that CO2, shipped it up the line to a brand new line back then, of course, to SACROC unit, and started the CO2 flood revolution, if you want to call it that, back in 72.
What the heck? Today's equivalent in production into money, that's 1.3 million a day that operation's making.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things associated with that. A lot of expenses on the CO2 side, purchasing the CO2, electricity to pump the CO2, electricity to recycle the CO2, electricity to re-inject the CO2. So it's not like they're clearing that much. It takes a lot to get that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I'm sure, like you were saying though, but I'm sure through time, like when you guys stepped in, they're optimizing this field, reducing those, that LOE, and trying to make that margin as big as possible. But still, that's like you're saying, the amount that goes behind the scenes into a successful CO2 flood is, things can stack up very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, you can't just say, hey, I want to inject some CO2 and get a big success here. I'm going to pick a well and just start shoving some CO2 down it. It definitely does not work like that. There's a whole team that works on the reservoir side and on the production side. And that's just after the CO2 gets to the field. There's a whole team that deals with the infrastructure and the facilities. And the key to it is having everybody work together. CO2 flood is the ultimate and an integrated team that has to put all the pieces together and work as a cohesive unit. And that's really the big difference that in operations that take you from a water flood where you can get by with a little bit because the water is a lot cheaper. And if you bypass a little bit of pay here and there, or if you don't optimize the pattern, that's not as big of an impact. But when you're using this expensive fluid and the intense efforts that it takes to get that there, you have to take it to that level.
Yeah.
So integration, I think, is discipline integration is a key component of all that.
Who's the biggest CO2 user, manipulator, injector in the Permian Basin right now? Is it still Kinder Morgan?
Possibly could be Oxy right now because they have a variety of fields, and they've got that big Century plant that's down in, I think, Terrell County, maybe Pecos County, somewhere down there.
Is that something they took over from Whiting?
From Sandridge, actually.
Getting back.
So, yeah, and they were partners with Sandridge right from the beginning.
Whoa. Okay, so that's the next place you end up, right? From Kinder Morgan to Sandridge.
Right. Yeah. Originally, it was called Petrosource Energy, and a guy that was the manager over there is another former Texaco engineer friend of mine who was in the CO2 group with me. His name's Greg West. So Greg called me up, and they were looking to expand. They had a couple CO2 floods already, one in progress and one in planning. And they took over the Wellman unit, which since you've been out here in the Permian Basin, you're aware of the Horseshoe Atoll. So SACROC is on the eastern side of the Horseshoe Atoll. And you take it all the way down and around, and on the west end is the Wellman unit. And it's the youngest piece of the Horseshoe Atoll. It's actually Wolfcampian in age. So SACROC is Cisco and Canyon in age. So oldest on the east and then youngest on the west. That's the last gasp of the Horseshoe Atoll as it's getting buried.
That's end Pennsylvanian to Permian time. That atoll's coming together.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah, long time. It was there for really major feature of the Permian Basin.
Right. Definitely.
So yeah. Anyway, so Greg is working with Petrosource, who's got this project, and he invited me to come over there with them. And it's a different sort of flood. What we're talking about at the Sac Rock unit is high pressure, a lateral flood. And Wellman unit's been producing almost as long as CO2, as long as the Sac Rock unit had been, but it's not had as much water flooding, and certainly hasn't had all that CO2 flooding. But it started in the 90s, I think, and it was a very low pressure situation. And as these things are growing very rapidly up, this area tend to have a lot of vertical perm in it. So what they were doing here is what's called a vertical CO2 flood or a gravity assisted CO2 flood. So you're injecting non-miscible CO2. So it's in a gas phase. And it all, of course, is less buoyant than, or more buoyant than the water. So it's rising to the top and then pushing down as it goes, as opposed to a CO2 flood in a miscible situation where you're sweeping across from a producer to an injector. So here you're sweeping down from the top to the bottom instead. So that was a pretty fascinating process.
Yeah.
A little different way to do things and a different way to look at it and monitor it.
The reservoir was connected vertically, not a horizontally laid down tilting or anything like it.
It was laid down horizontal. It has some horizontal layers in it, but it's a lot steeper. And by horizontal, I don't mean 0 to half degree. I'm talking about a degree or maybe 2 over a relatively small area, but that adds up. And then you have, fracturing and a lot of pore space development that allows for connection between layers. So it may not be, it's not exactly like a tank that's homogeneous isotropic media with a funnel shaped top on it, inverted funnel, that is. It's not exactly like that, but you get the layers so that it's sweeping back and forth and is on average more top down than it is left, right, or north, south, or east, west.
That is cool.
Yeah, and it was a pretty amazing project also. So
lucrative as the 30,000 barrels a day one, or is this smaller volume?
It's a smaller in volume scale. We're talking a few thousand barrels, 3,000 to maybe 5,000 barrel day sort of range there. But it's also a smaller footprint.
Right. Yeah.
It's maybe total of 2 square miles. It's not sitting in the middle of a section, of course. Like all your USGS topographic maps, your area of interest is right at the intersection of the 4 maps. Same thing with this. It wasn't in one section. It was scattered over several sections, but net area is probably 2.5, maybe 3 at most square miles.
Wow.
Interesting.
Experience with CO2, absolutely fascinating. We're now getting into the whiting part of your career, and then we'll transition into the drill down segment of the PBE podcast with you. Please tell us what happened at Whiting, major epiphanies along the way, and we'll wrap this up.
Okay. Well, at Whiting, I moved to something that I had never done before, which was a sandstone project. Back at that time, there was a lot of question about what's better. Should you have a CO2 project in a sandstone, or should they only be in carbonates? There's been a lot of evidence that sands would work fine, but it still seemed to be a question in everybody's mind. And for me, it was a little bit change of pace. So had some learning to do and think about things differently. This project that we moved to was an incised valley and had a sand channel fill inside there. And then the valley edges were all shale. So that made the seal on the sides. And then some anhydrite layers and internal stratification made the seals on the top. And dealing with just a different system here. But it works fine. The pH balances are what people worry about with sandstones, because you might have a little bit of calcite cement, but the CO2 is acidic. So are you going to dissolve everything out, ruin your well bores, destroy your formation, collapse the whole earth? What's this going to work out like? And that actually had been an issue that people worried about in carbonates too, but carbonates have such a large amount, at least in the limestones, they have such a large amount of free calcium available that the pH is fairly well balanced, and you don't get widespread total dissolution of everything that touches CO2. So concerns are valid, but maybe not at the scale that people were worrying about back in the, say, 80s and 90s, before you got a lot of evidence to see what exactly are those reactions going to be.
Wow. You're talking about dissolving the rock with the CO2 flood and creating more porosity and permeability almost uncontrollably if it does react violently.
Right.
Who knows, right?
That's a concern. You think about the experiment that your parents probably would never let you do of punching a tiny hole in a Coke can and letting it drip on your mom's sidewalk for 4 days and see what kind of hole you get at the bottom of it. That's the kind of thing that people were worried about.
Wow. Applying 5th grade science to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Wow.
It all comes full circle.
Yeah, it all comes full circle.
That was a fascinating topic. I mean, that's one that you could just make a webinar about just that idea.
Oh, yeah.
The porosity and permeability based on the pH of the brine that's in the system, and the CO2 as gas or dissolved and now acting more like a fluid. How is it reacting with the carbonate that's there? Are you precipitating other things out? I mean, that is such a cool idea.
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence that does happen. For example, you see injectivity decreases when you've been injecting CO2 for a while and then you switch to water. So there is a chemical reaction that is going on for sure. It's just what exactly is that? How significant is it? Does it repair itself over time with, are you balancing out the dissolution and precipitation? Or is this worse and worse every time? And which way is it going? Are you developing a cavern out there somewhere? We do know that breakthrough is a real thing. And that's when your CO2 flood front doesn't actually move continuously across. Instead, it moves in fingers, and whichever finger reaches the wellbore first on the opposite end gets all the pressure, and everything else is lost. And that becomes the focal point. So a self-focusing mechanism. So back to my thesis work.
Wow, the modeling in that must be outstanding.
Yeah, cavern dissolution things, which I guess that kind of did set me up for this. I suppose, at least in thinking about those kind of things.
Right.
Fingers, what can you do about it? Should you stop it before? Should you let it go on? But the key point is you're sweeping all this oil with all this CO2, and once you get a single zone that breaks through, you lose all the energy to all the rest of the systems because that's a relative perm change. It's much easier for the CO2 to flow that way. So everything that was out here is abandoned, and that CO2 pressure front comes back, collapses into that breakthrough zone, the thief zone, as we call it. And then everything that you've worked so hard to sweep towards your well, your producing well over here, is now abandoned in the reservoir and lost. So that's where the reservoir management part comes in.
I was going to say, does that dive more into the geology per se, where you understand, okay, this is the quote unquote depositional environment of this system, right? We have one of these, we're pumping into a grainstone, like backstepping shoal. So we can anticipate this is the orientation that it's going to sweep, but we know as we're getting towards, the fringe of this grainstone shoal, things are going to start to pinch out. And like, is that another way that you're planning these different CO2 floods, is like, as far as understanding the total geology of the study area?
Yeah. In an ideal situation, yes, that's what you would be doing. In practical terms, you usually are stuck with what was there before because these things start,
there's being in tertiary recovery, obviously, you're on the third phase, and you're trying to make the best of what you got.
Right. Now, are there some things you can do about it? Yes, there are.
Mhm.
Can you switch this pattern arrangement up? Can you switch things over a half a pattern? So what were injectors become producers and what were producers become injectors?
Mhm.
Yes, you can work with that system and keep these potential problems in mind to direct how you want to approach it.
Yeah.
And if you expand it to a new area, of course, drill new wells, then you're free to take your ideas and try to make the most of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So
interesting. I mean, with modern day development is something, I mean, to be kept in mind, right? If this is an area that, all right, we're only going to be able to produce that, that primary oil for X amount of time, but we know this is a very good, tertiary recovery zone. Because I know there's some companies that do that. They'll just go straight into tertiary. They'll drill a pattern out and then from there they'll flood. But yeah, that's just, I don't know, brain spinning. Got a bunch of ideas going on.
Yeah. And when you think about it, I mean, things are the way they are for a reason, and that usually is because what do we have here, and how are we going to produce it today? And if this thing is not producing next week, I'm really concerned about it. If it's not
Mhm.
producing 2 years after I retire, I'm not going to spend as much effort in designing for that eventuality,
Yeah.
which may not even happen. So
Yeah.
why am I going to put all that effort into it? But if you're going to start from scratch with this end in mind, you would set up your whole entire field a little bit differently.
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, Kinder Morgan is a good example of somebody who has taken that. They've done something that's a little bit different, which is go into a zone that does not have a main pay zone. So there's no free flowing primary productive target, and there's not really a secondary target. So they've gone into something which is called a greenfield when you do this approach. And they drill this up with the one and only goal being tertiary recovery without ever going through phase one or phase two.
Yeah.
Wow.
So set it up exactly like they want it. And they've actually done that in, I think that's Andrews. No, that's Gaines County.
Okay.
Gaines County, they're hitting this greenfield idea.
Say again, what about the greenfield idea?
It's happening in Gaines County, which is ROC. I mean, Gaines County's a
Yes.
prolific part of the Permian Basin for sure.
Yeah. And that big ROZ is exactly what they were targeting there. So you're right on track with that.
Man.
So thumbs up, Troy.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Gaines, you're a young professional into your solid career. Carbon has been a big part of this, CO2 specifically, right? And now we're talking about carbon use, carbon storage. It's a kind of a new thing. Young professionals, we had Dylan Morton on the show. He was like, I'm kind of getting interested. He's a grad student at OSU, kind of getting interested in carbon sequestration. I have all kinds of interesting thoughts on it. Of course, no shock there, I guess. I want to hear, though, and we can transition to the drill down unless you want to say anything else about your career and the societies. We didn't really touch too much on that. You were developing yourself professionally in the AAPG and locally in the societies this whole time, which is fascinating to talk about. So we can talk more about that. But the drill down, the use of carbon, the carbon CO2 being used for production increase, for storing, getting it out of the atmosphere, helping us to better understand carbon and its place in the natural process of the planet. There's a lot of things happening here. Where do you guys want to go with this? You want to stay in conception or we transition to the drill?
Skip, what do you think?
It's on you, Mike. I was going to say, I mean, I really want to talk a little bit about the societies. I still want to do that because I mean, I feel like that is a very crucial part as far as as far as the whole geological community.
Spend some time on that now. If you want to do that now.
Yep, and then we'll transition.
Okay. So, like you said that I did for you, I had somebody do for me when I first got to Midland. Somebody started hauling me around to all these WTGS and PBS SCPM talks. I didn't get as many in the summer, but I think I caught one maybe at the beginning, and then there was a summer break, and then maybe one at the end. So that's where I first saw that these things existed. Didn't really understand the difference between the societies or how the structures were between them. I mean, I was a student member of AAPG, but we got together a couple times, had some pizza, but we didn't really talk about what are these organizations, how are they related, or how are they not related, how do they work, what do they provide for us. I just knew if you want to get a paper on some topic, these different organizations are places for you to go. They sponsor people to do research, and if you do your research, you might be able to present a poster or even write a paper for them. And that was pretty much the extent of my understanding of what the societies were and what they did.
Wow.
So my first introduction then is starting to go to these monthly luncheons. And maybe I've been here perhaps a year or so when somebody approached me at one of the meetings and said, "Hey, you're new and out of college, probably has some good ideas about talks that we should see or speakers that we should hear." And I said, wait a minute. That's a lot of responsibility. Let me start a little bit lower. And so I agreed to do the program part of the luncheon, which is making sure that the AV equipment was there, that things were loaded up, that microphones were available, and screens were there. And so I handled that part at first. And then that, of course, transitioned into, oh, why don't you help us find some speakers? You know people. You've heard talks, you've read papers, bring somebody in, which was very daunting to me. That was actually the hardest break-in thing I've ever done, is to try to get past my discomfort level and get into that, asking somebody to present and knowing what I should be looking for to even ask somebody to come talk to us. What are people going to be interested in? How do I know what Troy wants to hear? What do I know what Skip wants to hear?
Right.
But I agreed to do it, and it worked out pretty good. There was, the previous guy had some ideas, things that didn't work out timing wise with somebody he had. So here's one or two names for that. And I never did get around to talking to so-and-so. So here's another one or two names. So now you only have to come up with 5 or 6 names. And so that's how I got started in the societies. And then that led to, of course, hey, you did an okay job with that. Why don't you come over here and help us with this and help us with that? So then I started becoming aware of the differences between WTGS, West Texas Geological Society, and PBS SEPM, which at that time was still Permian Basin section of the Society of Economic and Paleontologists and Mineralogists, and now, of course, known as the Society for Sedimentary Geology. But we keep the original initials. So,
I didn't know there was a change there. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a interesting change, and I spent some time learning about both boards and eventually being on both boards, not at the same time. And back then, we had an agreement with WTGS where we shared office space and where we shared an executive director. Mm-hmm. Now, Permian Basin section is all separate and completely volunteer. So we don't have an executive director. So that's why when people call the number, they have to leave a voice message, because it's all a volunteer. There's nobody here during the day. We all do this after hours and on our own time.
Right.
So that's the local society level. And then, of course, if you know any of the history of AAPG and how it came about, there used to be a lot of individual geological societies that were local, and nobody really did anything together. So back in the early 1900s, people started saying, we've got some common things around here, around the nation, and we've got some regional trends that we should all collaborate on and learn from each other with. So by 1917, the AAPG, American Association of Petroleum Geologists, had been established from those original local societies. And then as more and more societies grew with the oil fields expanding and new discoveries being made, then you got the affiliated society. So that's, maybe you had some AAPG members already who moved to that location and joined this local society. And at some point, they felt like they were ready to communicate and be involved with the nation as a whole. So they became affiliated societies with the AAPG. And that's how we got to be where we are now with the societies having representation inside of AAPG through the House of Delegates. And Troy, I know you're an alternate House of Delegate member, so you're a little bit familiar with that, but I don't know that everyone is.
Right. No, it's completely new. Feels like it's new every time I dive into it every year too. I report.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah, and then of course there's also, there's the national level and there's our local level, but there needs to be something in between also. So AAPG sponsored in cooperation with the affiliated societies, the sections originally. Now we have sections, which are regional society collaborations, if you want to call it that. And we have regions, which are the same thing, but international instead of inside the US. So Southwest section of AAPG is the one that I was involved with, of course. So to be a member of Southwest section, you either are a member of one of the local societies that are affiliated with the section, or you're a member of AAPG whose address is inside those boundaries. So it's a little less formal, but a separate corporation from AAPG or from the affiliated societies, but linked to both and cooperative with both. So I was completely unaware of all these differences when I joined Midland.
Well, you just doctored us up. I mean, I've learned a ton on the history and just a revolutionary concept of the AAPG saying, hold on, regionally across the whole country, we got some similarities here. We should probably get together and try to integrate here and maybe discoveries. And it certainly did.
Yeah. Instead of stepping on each other's toes, let's work together and let's get through this. Right. And then we don't want to be copying the same work. If this one society is doing research on one thing and this other society is doing the same exact research, then we're kind of wasting resources in a sense, right? So let's come to exactly. Yeah, let's come together and make this thing happen.
So, and then now you have shared resources. You have a bigger pool that everyone is helping a little bit with all the things. So from the money and the research and the publication side, we are all integrating these things now instead of everybody doing their own little thing.
Yeah.
Conflicting or not conflicting, and you don't know which until you get to the end.
How do you see the AAPG doing after the COVID-19? Would you call it a recession? We'll just call it post-COVID-19. How's the AAPG doing in your opinion? How are the local societies in Midland doing? I know Midland is blowing and going. It's still burning, from what I can tell and what I can hear. But how are the societies doing? How are you guys transitioning with this digital format and everything else after COVID?
Yeah, let's start with the local societies, because that's the ones that I know most about. Then I can do some arm waving for the rest of the stuff later. But I think the key thing that's going to come out of this on the other side, and which we're already doing at Permian Basin section of SEPM, is having a dual format for the luncheons. So what we have gone to is we were completely closed in December and in April and May. In April and May, we transitioned those speakers, Dr. Rebecca Dodge and I forgot her last name, Sarah. Anyway, our two speakers, we transitioned them to the summer and picked it up then to give us that cushion in April and May. And we have now, starting in, I guess, September, a dual format. So Troy, you really wanted to see our April talk, but you're not going to be here. You're off in Tucson at the Gem and Mineral Show, even though it doesn't start until Wednesday. You're going to be there on Tuesday. Oh, all of a sudden now we have this online option, which you can join us from over there. And it's a $5 cost, as opposed to, hey, last minute, I think I can get in here. I wasn't planning to attend the meeting, but now I'm going to go over here and eat lunch with you guys. And it's the $30 option. So just for $5, you can come join here. And that I think is going to stick with us. We're going to have a virtual platform option and a live in-person option too. And that brought up some other things that we've been wrestling with already. With the wider population, you get a lot more things that you have to worry about as far as food allergies, peanuts, shellfish, whatever other things, vegan, vegetarian. And it's hard, especially when you're dealing with a relatively small audience. Maybe it's okay when you have 300 people, but when you have a smaller audience, it's hard to get all these things balanced. And some caterers do a better job of making sure that vegetarian items never touch other items. So one solution that we came up with is, okay, let's split this up and let people who don't want to worry about those things and would probably bring their own lunch anyway, let's let them have credit for that. Let's don't charge them the price to get the meal. So if you want to attend and bring your own lunch, let's make a new price for that. Let's set it the same as being online, because yes, we're still having to pay for the venue, but we're not paying for the catering. So let's just give them a break and cause it to be the same as if you were there virtually. And what about students? We're always trying to support students, to encourage students, to bring students in, to reach students, which is part of why this online option was attractive to us. But we've got local students. We've got Sol Ross, Midland College, and University of Texas Permian Basin. So all of those might have kids who would be able to come at different times. Let's give them a price break too. So we've gone to $5 for bring your own lunch, or $5 for joining us online, $10 for students, and then it's the regular $25 for regular members or regular street people, if you want to call it that, if you come in and eat with us and bring a reservation. It does cost us more if we have to get extra food, so we add $5 if you walk in. You're still welcome. We just want to set it up like that. Yeah. So I think this new structure, at least for us, is going to be something that we're going to take forward with us in the future, and the online option. And we try to get permissions from the speakers to let us record their talks. And if they're able to do that, then we can keep those on the website, and you can purchase those later, and you can attend luncheon with us after the fact.
Right on. And how's that been? How's the response been since you guys have been kind of compiling this new way of doing it? A lot more students, a lot more young professionals, a lot more attendance overall?
It's still lower than it was. And I think that is partially a COVID response and partially employment level response. But our online is starting to pick up. At first, we only had maybe 5 or 6 the first couple of times we did it. And now it's not uncommon to have 15 people join online. And our in-person numbers are also coming up. So that's why I'm thinking it's a combination of COVID and the unemployment situation.
That's interesting. It's the commitment. It's the commitment to the change and making those rules or making those plans, and then just doing it. And then all of a sudden it works.
Setting up the infrastructure and trying to do it in such a way to honor all the needs of all of your customers, if you want to call them that, your constituents, and keep that.
Go ahead.
For everyone. Just to keep it as equitable as you can make it.
Yeah.
So we still have expenses, and we're a nonprofit. We're not trying to make money off this, but we're also trying not to go broke. So keeping these things in mind and trying to be as fair as you can with your membership.
Oh, yeah. One thing that's interesting is the money goes towards supporting someone for a paper or a poster or something like that, something new, fresh. That's really important, really, really important. That's why the dues are so important. That's why we do what we do in financial support as professionals to the society. We got to feed this society that has the curiosity of creating something new and spending their extra time reading something differently, thinking about it differently, and chasing down that rabbit hole and finding something of value that hasn't been said before. We have to feed those platforms, and that's why we exist. That's why we're still members of these things, and we pay these dues. So fascinating, and thank you for taking such a time, so much effort in your career as a professional, developing, but also giving back at the same time. Thank you, seriously.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's rewarding on both sides. You can't just take all the time. You gotta give a little to, and then you're thinking is more rewarding and means more to you.
So the AAPG event this year is a dual threat event, SCG, AAPG coming together in Denver. Last time that happened was like 60 years ago or something. I don't know what I've read for the fun facts on that, but that's really cool. Geophysicists, geologists coming together. Let's create some value. How do you think this is all going to play out? Is it going to be a hybrid, virtual, in-person, all in person? What do you know about this event?
My impression is this is going to be a hybrid event also. And then, of course, with the hybrid events, you have to worry about time zones. When we did the AAPG CCUS conference earlier this month, that was last month, end of last month, we had that dual format also, but we're dealing with people in New Zealand and people on the West Coast, people on the East Coast, people in England. So trying to get these times so that it's not completely horrible for everyone is a difficult thing. But I think that that's going to be a way forward for at least a few years here. It reduces the travel cost, the expense of being wherever you're going to be. If you have this year restrictions on, hey, you have to be here for 2 weeks in quarantine before we're going to let you out into the streets of Denver, or whatever situation like that might be, it eliminates all those things. And it makes the time commitment for the people attending smaller also, because you don't have to take off a day or two ahead of time. You just take your time during the actual conference. And when it's over, you can go back to work, or you can get back home, or whatever it is that you need to do. Yeah. So I think that that's going to be a model, at least for a little while, that will be continuing. I think in person. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Troy.
Well, the in-person part of the APG SEG combined event in October of this year is going to be held at a big convention center in downtown Denver, or where's the setting?
I have not heard where the location is, but my expectation is it's going to be the same convention center where we would have had it. But I don't know that for sure. But it'd be something along the lines of something that we're used to.
Wow. We got to get there, Skippo. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we got to get there, man. We got to get back live when people are getting back live. I'll wear my mask. I want to be polite. I have no problem with that. That's fine. I want to see you. I want to feel you. You know what I mean?
I miss those convention floors, man. I miss them. I miss talking to people. I miss, the ideas going around. I miss that energy. I miss that buzz. There's something about it. I mean, the online thing, very, very convenient. But I mean, as we all know, being at the convention there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. Yeah,
it's the interactions that you didn't anticipate and couldn't plan for ahead of time that end up having the most value to you at the end, at least in my experience.
Yes, agreed. You are tuned in to the PBE podcast, where we're taking new information, applying it to new real-world applications to make discoveries. We got to stop and take a minute and thank our sponsors, BRT Energy Advisors, Better Reservoir Technologies, results without the BS. We've had Alan on our show, and I can tell you from experience, he definitely has seen seismic from around the world, including, of course, right here in the Permian Basin. If you are in the EMP business and you want to use seismic data to increase the value of your assets, or if you want to drill safer wells at lower costs using seismic, then you got to get a hold of Alan Bertain and work with his team at BRT Energy Advisors. If you check out our podcast from episode 70, you'll see that not only he understands geophysics, business, and people, but he also explains complicated subjects in a clear and simple way. Visit them at www.brtenergy.com/PBE. We are now officially going into the drill down segment with Mr. Mike Rains about carbon use, carbon storage, sequestration, the geology, the business. Sir, please take it away.
Thanks, guys. So let me first acknowledge that John Caldy is the person who put down this description here, this nice little graphic. So I'm going to talk about where CO2 comes from in our modern industrial society. I'm not talking about natural CO2 at this point, just what's anthropogenic or man-made CO2 and what can we do with it? What's the idea? What's the business model behind it? So let's start over here on the left side. We've got gas processing plant here, power station here, cement plant here. And this power station can be fueled by coal or by gas. Either way, it produces a CO2 stream, and that CO2 stream can be captured and separated from the other things, and then it can be compressed and transported out into the oil field. In this case, it doesn't necessarily have to be an oil field. It could be an area that doesn't have any oil but has some underground storage potential. In the case of the oil field, you have producers and you have injectors. So the CO2 is injected into the reservoir, and then it sweeps the CO2, as we talked about briefly in the previous segment, and that CO2 and oil combine together, and then they can be produced up the hole in the producers. Then you can re-inject this whole thing and start the whole system all over again. As we mentioned with the greenfield idea, there's usually a main pay in an oil zone, but in a greenfield, this may not exist. It may just be all water in the transition zone. So in that case, all of this oil would be something that would have been left behind before. So you're getting energy out of what was an unavailable resource before. So that means you don't have to go drill new wells in a new area. You don't have to have extra pipelines. You can use existing infrastructure and reduce your footprint by accessing all this oil that would have been unavailable otherwise. So when we talk about CCS, or carbon capture and storage, the difference in that is that none of this oil is available in a main pay or in a transition zone. This is just a porous media that has some sort of non-fresh water in it, something that's not potable. And you can basically do something similar, which is you inject the CO2 here, and it fills up the structure or stratigraphic trap that you've got, and then you can leave that stored in the ground until you need it for some other purpose, some other time in future history. So
going from the CO2 compression unit, and the solid blue line going off to the right of the screen has 100% CO2 or 99.9% CO2 and something else. That goes down into the reservoir. How much actually comes back from production? How much is it 100% sequestered and being trapped in the reservoir, or is it 40%? How much stays in reservoir in this specifically the enhanced oil recovery method that you're showing here, injecting CO2? How much comes back?
Okay, so some estimates are that you end up saving 95% of that in the ground, and that may even be a low number. Of course, that's assuming that you reuse this CO2, which everyone does. It's too expensive of a fluid to waste. So everyone's very conscious of keeping that CO2 available and putting it back into the ground. You have some things where you might have equipment failures or something where you lose a little bit of CO2. And you have some of that CO2 is in transition at all times. But some people who've studied this, and I have not studied this myself, I'm just referencing other people, you can expect 95 to 97% of it to be in the ground at any one time. And when you're done with this thing, of course, you can choose to seal those wells off, and everything that's there will stay in the ground.
Interesting. We had Alan Bertain on the show, and he talked about how some cases you inject it in and they thought they had good seal integrity, meaning there's going to be a complete cap, there's no cracks, there's no leaks, and later to find out the CO2 is seeping up these chimneys and this structure complexity, which they didn't know was there when they started the project. So it's interesting anomaly in there.
Yeah, and that is where your site characterization comes into play. And that is one thing that helps reduce your risk is if you have an area with known storage capabilities ahead of time. So in other words, if you have a dome here that is solid and hasn't leaked over time, as long as you're staying in this same area, you have a higher confidence. As you get further and further away from your known points, of course, and where you have evidence that gases of this size or smaller have been contained in the past, then of course your risk increases.
What part of the country has this technology developed the most in just our country? Where do we find capture separation plants? Where are the compression units? Where's this happening right now in the front lines of this technology in our country?
So in the United States, it's what I call Midwest, to say Nebraska, Iowa, down to the Gulf Coast, not too far east of the Permian Basin, and not too far east from the Gulf Coast, and not too far west from the Permian Basin. Just put a square or rectangle in there, and that's the area where most is being developed. I think California may have a few people working on it, but they don't have any currently operating enhanced oil recovery CO2 floods. So I'm going to put Permian Basin and Gulf Coast above them, and both of us above Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas sort of thing. But Kansas is kind of the heart of a lot of the research that's going on right now. And tying into them are the states surrounding them. It's happening in the Texas Panhandle. It's happening in the Gulf Coast. And of course, you already know about all the things going on here in EOR in the Permian Basin.
Mm-hmm. So for the future of this carbon sequestration, because this is a very hot topic nowadays, is there any, or do you know of any potential policy or anything down the road in which would make the cost of CO2 flooding or just pumping CO2 into the subsurface cheaper? Because like you said, every little bit of it that you get out, you want to capture again because it's expensive.
Right. Yeah. The things that are coming down the line that I'm seeing a lot of people talk about so far are mainly anthropogenic related CO2 sources. So nothing related to the big gas fields like Bravo Dome, McElmo Dome, and Gomez Field. None of that is going to be impacted by that. What the man-made CO2 sources have coming down the line is something called Q45. And in California, they're doing something called the low carbon fuel standard credit. So that is a tax break either directly or next year when you file your taxes on CO2 that you've taken out of the system and have sent to be stored or used, as long as it is monitored and tracked so that you can account for the volumes. And those things are giving you between $35 and $50 a barrel on the federal level, or $35 to $50 a ton on the federal level. And the California low fuel standards, I don't remember what that exact dollar figure is, but it's a little bit higher. And there's a difference in how the IRS system works versus how the California system works. So people are working on getting these things to be more easy to use and easy to share, so that you don't have to have somebody taking a tax credit who also is handling the CO2 and storing the CO2, which right now, how that transition works is a little bit complex, let's say. So you can't just have right now. What the idea is, and what people are pushing for, is to get Congress to authorize a direct payment for the tax credits, so that the person who gets the tax credit can share that tax credit with other people, get a refund on their tax credit if they have paid in more than that tax credit is worth, as opposed to the current system, which you have to make enough tax liability to take that off the tax liability. You can't just use that money as a rebate. directly, like you and I would with our personal income tax returns.
Mhm.
You pay in more than you need, you get some money back in a form of a check. So that's kind of what people are hoping to get to, but
Yeah.
that's not where it is right now. And I think that would be the next step to make all these relationships smoother, with
Yeah.
who has the CO2 generation, who's capturing it, who's transporting it, who's
Yeah.
storing it, and who's monitoring it.
I was going to say,
Usually
so
the
as
monitoring,
the infrastructure for this whole system improves, that's probably when we'll start to see more policy come down the line for it.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay.
That would make sense. I mean, the government's probably best role in this is to better understand the anthropogenic, the man-made. We know that's a byproduct of what we do, and we're not going to stop what we do. So let's focus on that. Let's get
Yeah.
that back into the ground, or do something efficient with that. I could see that being a logical way to go for the government to get involved. That's it. Stop it there. There's no more about saving the planet or anything like that. Government's not involved in that. Let's move on. So I like that, creating policy and creating a successful story about helping operators and helping companies that are figuring out how to solve this problem right here, whether it's going to storage or going to use. Obviously, going to use is what I find the most interesting, I would say, because the byproduct of what we do, not only are we getting paid to focus on this project, and it could be a career, 30 years, 40 years, billions of dollars into taking that man-made CO2, putting it to use that has a positive byproduct and it's safe. So one thing I was thinking about with carbon sequestration is recently I discovered through conversations with the Magnum Research Institute and Stan Keith putting this together, the planet loses hydrogen and helium. That's the only mass we actually lose through time as we're swirling through space. Helium, hydrogen is the only two things that we're kind of losing constantly. So is it possible to find a good geologic environment where we can pump CO2 in, and the byproduct is allowing CO2 to be converted in and release hydrogen and helium maybe through the cracks and through these chimneys and these bad seals that some people have found? Is there a way to convert that into something that it looks like the planet might actually need and use maybe? Yeah, that's an interesting idea anyway.
Yeah, of course you can make hydrogen. I'm not aware of anybody commercially available to make helium, but you can take a methane stream, for example, and create hydrogen, and you get water and CO2 on the other end of it. So from that standpoint, I guess that's something that's possible.
Cool.
As far as I know, helium is just a radioactive decay product. I don't think anybody's found a way to
Yeah.
effectively make it.
Yeah. Unlock it in some way. And then CO2 in general going down and precipitating out as a calcite, as a scale in this big void space. That's more of a storage idea where it goes in as a gas, it converts into some kind of liquid or some kind of eventually a precipitate where it truly gets locked in a physical state in the subsurface. That would be a fascinating study to get rid of the CO2.
And there is a group that's working on understanding mineralization caused by CO2, and that's where you're kind of going with this idea. I think if we can not just have it be a natural byproduct, but if we can engineer it to be in a transport system that we preferentially lock up, like we see in nature with calcite filled fractures and things like that.
Yep, ophicalcite, the huge bodies of serpentinite from the natural process of serpentinization that creates a massive rock around the planet that's very, very carbonate rich. If we could do something similar, we can make a man-made. That's a natural process, but maybe we can make that happen with using this in the right environment, doing the right geologic study. I think it's definitely very fascinating, and especially when you have the government involved, not just America, which is leading the front lines of new ideas and innovation, and doing something like this with this anthropogenic product that we make. But other countries can get really involved in this and really help start developing it around the world. And it sounded like you guys had an AAPG convention just recently about specifically this. Was that a worldwide event, or was that mostly Americans? What was that like?
That was a worldwide event. I'd say the majority of participants probably were from the US, but we had a wide variety from, I think, every continent, maybe. I could be wrong about that, but we had a wide range of participants anyway. And that's just the ones that were live. So I don't know about the people who were entirely in bedtime for the entire time of our physical meeting. And so those people would have been watching it later, and of course not able to interact with us on the chats and things. But I would not be surprised, let me say it that way, if we didn't have someone, at least a few participants from every continent.
Wow, that's fantastic. Fantastic. Skippo, anything else on carbon sequestration?
No, I think I mean, for the bases that we wanted to cover, I think we handled it pretty well.
Yeah.
I was going to say I got some questions for the completion segment, but yeah.
Okay. Well, let me just remind everybody that all those things that I said about the government participation, the taxes and things, that's just my opinion or what I've heard, and it's not reference
speculation. Nothing's set in stone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think since we did a lot of the society stuff and we talked about the AAPG and this upcoming event, we kind of led with that. Now transition to the carbon capture, which was a fascinating, geologic specific part of our drill down segment. Are you guys ready for the completion?
I'm ready. Let's give it a shot.
Let's give it a shot. So I'm going to try to run this again. I tried it last time. Let's see what happens. So, Mr. Rains, me and Skip started a podcast, and we weren't sure exactly what was going to happen, but we knew, and we were a part of this very unique network, and that combining our thoughts and actions for the first time together created new information. And that new information gets applied to new real world applications. And I believe this show is ultimately about making discoveries, de-risking our time as professionals and geoscientists to make a difference. And that's what the PBE podcast has turned into. And sir, thank you so much for what you have done in the Permian Basin as a professional and as a member of the societies we all appreciate and we all are in support of. And now we are going to roll into the completion segment with Mr. Mike Rains. Okay, sir. So what is it from your perspective, now that we're kind of talking completion, the future of carbon sequestration specifically, then we'll get into the oil and gas industry. I want to start with, where do you see the business and the career for geoscientists in carbon use and carbon sequestration?
I think this is going to be the key environmental action, it's sustainability sort of function that we're going to see for a while. Plus, it's going to be a major increasing part of our total energy mix, at least here in the US, where we have a lot of stranded resources that we can't get out with traditional methods. We can't afford to leave those resources behind. Typical recovery in a field is anywhere from as low as 5% to maybe 35%. And using CO2, you can expect in our normal EOR sort of operations to get at least an additional 10%, maybe a little bit more. So if we had a resource like CO2 that was available in a lot higher demand, then we wouldn't have to be so conservative with using it in the absolute best places. We could probably bump that 10% up quite a bit. How many notches? I don't know. But if you had an unlimited supply of CO2, you could sweep until you got as much as you could stand to get out before you moved on to the next area or interval. Wow. So I see that as being a valuable career path that's still going to be around for 20 plus years.
Well, I think you're going to be a mentor in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You are an absolute, a very viable resource for all young professionals, for the AAPG, for the development of what we're talking about. Your experience in this show has really opened my eyes to, you are the guy, you're like the pioneer almost in carbon usage of the Permian Basin. Almost, you were close to Texaco and starting in your thesis, all tying into constantly thinking about CO2 and how it's being used. That's fascinating. Skip, or real quick, if you want to unshare your screen, that'll get us all back to seeing
Okay.
each other normal size.
Yeah.
Skippo, what do you got?
And I was going to say the same thing. I mean, for the most part, Mike, I mean, your career, unbeknownst to you, not only have you had these, impacts within the oil and gas industry, but, this new technology that's coming out with carbon sequestration, you're going to be on the front lines of it because, like Troy was saying, you pioneered this or helped pioneer the CO2 flooding within the Permian. So you are going to be the guy that's talking to all these young professionals, telling them, hey, like Troy was talking about, we're in this dome setting, but as we get further out from the dome, we're going to lose seal integrity. Or when we're working in a limestone of this nature, these are things that could possibly precipitate or things that could happen. Or when we're working in a sand, like, because people just want to find space in the subsurface and inject CO2. And it's like, no, 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 no. That's just because it has perm and porosity doesn't mean we can put CO2 in it. Like that's not where we start.
Yeah, that's true. I want to back up and say, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I really wasn't around to help pioneer all the CO2 floods in the 70s or even the 80s.
You were close to it. You were close to it. You're at least.
I was still in high school, Troy. Dang it.
Listen, you are a portal to that old of doing that, and the pioneers that you learned about in your early career. That's how I see it. You're a pioneer to me.
Pioneer to you. Okay. Oh, yeah. It's all relative, right? So yeah, pioneer to Troy and Skip.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating. I truly enjoyed getting to more of your story, Mr. Rains, and the fact that no question about it, we will be in contact and crossing paths and being your biggest fan as you develop a new company. It's called. Tell us a little bit about your company and where are you going with this?
Yeah, well, before we do that, we kind of just really lightly brushed over something. I think Skip may have mentioned it and you mentioned it within a minute and a half of each other. And I want to jump back to that before we talk about the company. And that is seal integrity and knowing if we're here or not. That all is going to be tied into monitoring. In my time at, most three of the companies that I worked for at Texaco, Kinder Morgan, and Whiting, we were all working with a group up at Colorado School of Mines, a consortium called the Reservoir Characterization Project. And at that time, they were focusing on learning how to monitor CO2 with seismic. So this whole monitoring thing is going to be something that ties up a lot of geologic resources in the future. If you've read anything about these carbon capture and storage sites specifically, they may want you to ensure that CO2 is going to be stable for 10,000 years, 500 years, 100 years, and even for some of the lower risk areas, 50 years. So you're going to have geologic and geophysics integration to monitor those. Those are really the only ways we have to see where that plume is and what's happening to it. Is it expanding? Is it leaking off in a direction we didn't anticipate? Or is it stable?
Wow.
So let's not forget the monitoring aspect for career development. That's going to be a key component.
Wow. And fantastic. I'm so glad the monitoring is where the discovery is probably going to be made. We know kind of what elemental makeup is going in. What's the elemental makeup coming out, right? What changed potentially, not just CO2, but everything, all the byproducts of that. So
and it'll be interesting to see too. I mean, some of these areas where, you'll shoot these surveys beforehand, right? These 4D surveys after tertiary recovery, right? How has this reservoir evolved from when we shot this survey, when we were producing the primary oil versus, 20 years down the road when we've been, pumping water and CO2 into it.
Yeah, and the ultimate vision, which we're not quite there yet, but the ultimate vision is that you'll be able to take the before image, correct for any changes that have happened in the reservoir quality, and then have the after image, which tells you this is where the CO2 plume is, and this is where dissolution has occurred. That's where precipitation has occurred, or at least where there's some changes, and we can infer what those changes are. And one of them being, where is the CO2 now and what's happening to it? Is it stabilizing? Is it dissolving into the water in a way we didn't anticipate? Or is it on track to do what we thought it would do when we started this project.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
Yeah, risk reduction.
Yeah.
That's right.
And for the characterization on the front end with your first survey too. You guys have probably, yeah, I think you talked about it the last episode that I saw. You talked about shear waves.
Mhm.
And you can use the shear and P contrast to see where heterogeneity is varying, and you can infer from that where you might have fractures, where you might have preferred flow paths that might change the way you would model the CO2 migration and its stability in the future.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And is that heterogeneity, is that, those fracture networks, are they healed? Are they still open? And yeah, you can start diving into those rabbit holes as well. But yeah.
right. And then you can say, hey, wait a minute, I see something that makes me nervous here. This heterogeneity is telling me there's open fractures.
Right.
I'm no longer sure that this is a good site, and I want to downgrade it and look at another site as a higher possible position.
Love it.
Yeah, say that again, Troy.
Lowering the risk.
Yes, lowering the risk.
Predictions. Fantastic.
Yeah, and so a big geologic from both geophysics and geologic integration for finding those risk factors and mitigating them if you can, or pointing them out to managers and team members to make sure that you get the right places and that you don't have something that you could have prevented as far as a leak off. You want to control what you've got, whether you're using it for enhanced oil recovery or whether you're just putting it in the ground to store permanently. You want to know what happens to it and have some confidence that it's going to be where you said it would be.
That's right. That's right. Fantastic. Mr. Rains, please tell us a little bit about your company. How did it start? What are you focusing on? How do you see the future going for your company?
Okay. My company name is Mars Exploration and Energy Incorporated, or LLC, excuse me. And it started when I left Whiting Petroleum. I decided to take that opportunity to go out on my own a little bit, do some consulting. The idea is that I would be focused on enhanced oil recovery and maybe CCS and CCUS options, which I've done a little bit of, but in reality, with the demand level that we are at right now, and with the COVID problems, I'm just really doing some reservoir characterization, saltwater disposal. It's a variety of things, and just now partnering with some people to see about bringing oil and gas projects forward, doing some evaluations at that stage now.
Cool.
Hopefully to be offering some other services soon, like core related items, tracking core from the wellbore all the way into the lab and making sure that the clients get what they want out of it. Because sometimes there's a disconnect between what you get in a bid and what you get in end results, or between what you said to the company and what they heard when they did the analysis. So my concept there for that service would be to integrate everything, follow it all the way through, be the communication key, and make sure that the goals you want to achieve are really what the company understands, not give me a bid on X, Y, and Z process, but get me to this end point.
That is a company in itself. You said all kinds of things: reservoir characterization, carbon use and storage. I mean, the simple fact of your experience of all the service companies and all the operators trying to come together, integrate for a project, and make sure that we're saying the same thing. My approximation of the reality of this project is the same as yours, or at least similar. And weighing you being able to be that point of contact for companies, oh my gosh, worth your gold, sir.
Yeah, that would be my hope, is that even if you give them the end point that you want to get to, and I can communicate that clearly with them, that if they have an idea that says, well, you asked for X, Y, and Z to lead to A, but it would be better if we did B plus C to get to A, and have those conversations go through seamlessly and not have any difficulties with language use or terminology or end goals, just to have everybody be on the same page.
Yeah.
With P, I would go for A, ended up with P. I don't understand. How did that?
Yes. And why did you give me that?
Man, that's fantastic. Good work, and super excited to see how that develops, and obviously your development in the societies. How's that going? Or if Skips, you have anything specific about his company before I want to know more about where he's going with the society?
No. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep the train rolling.
Keep the train rolling. Yeah. Speaking of trains, here's a little trivia for you, Troy. No one knows this except some of my family members. I was a tour guide / train engineer on a little 16 gauge railroad in Caldera Canyon in college. So the train was rolling then too.
Right. I love that.
Oh, that's great. It always comes full circle. Comes full circle.
Sometimes little circles, sometimes big circles.
Yeah, sometimes big ones.
Now, with that all being said, are you in pursuit of the presidency of the AAPG, or if more responsibility with the societies, or you comfortable where everything's at and how you're supporting role and everything you're currently doing? Where do you see yourself with the society?
Well, I am currently president of PBS SEPM and treasurer of BPA. And then on, something that I should have talked about a lot earlier is the AAPG's technical interest group for carbon capture, use, and storage, the CCUS TIG, or TIG if you prefer. So since you brought this up, let me invite everybody who's interested in carbon capture, use, and storage that's an AAPG member especially to get on there, search for that TIG, and join us. We're not very active on the website right now, but I would like to have that improve. And I think that's where my society involvement is going to mostly be right now. Still a WTGS delegate to the House of Delegates until 2022. Don't plan to change that any. Need some help with Permian Basin Section SEPM. If any of your audience members are already members, you can contact me. I'm looking for some people to run for the board next year, and we're getting to the end of that cycle. It's time to put the officer elections together. So, that reminds me also, if you're not currently a member of PBS SEPM and you want to be, you can pay now, be a member in good standing for the rest of this year, and your dues will take you all the way to the end of next year. So June of 2022 for the same price, and you can vote in the elections, you can run for officer. So if you're interested, come on down.
Right on. And you visit the website to get all that information, get all logged into that?
Yeah, www.pbs-sepm.org. Cool. So it's not a com, it's an org.
Right. I got the letter from the WTGS. It was great to see how many people were applying for presidency. Dave Cannon going for president of the WTGS. We had all kinds of people and new people, Chevron folks, and there was another big company in there. Maybe it was Exxon. Can't remember. It was, just great to see. And let's keep going down this path. I love that.
Yeah. Yep. Plan to just stay with WTGS as House of Delegates for myself right now and see where that goes. Maybe back off a little bit. I'll be treasurer of Division of Professional Affairs in AAPG for another year. So that'll keep me busy. We've got a lot of changes coming down the pike in DPA. We're looking at the possibility of doing a worldwide certification for geologists, and also looking at subject matter expert certification. So you can take some courses. Mostly, I think they're going to be online courses, and get your knowledge up to speed, take a test, and have your peers provide a certificate, a number. I don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, but have a designation for you that says yes, Troy Tillmeyer has completed this training. He's passed this test. It's a worldwide recognized rigorous test, and he is a subject matter in X. So you can check out the DPA's LinkedIn page for a survey about that. I think if you want to say, I'd like to contribute to what I think is important for subject matter experts. This one's not important. That one is. Those sort of questions will be out there. So anybody who's interested in participating with that, especially AAPG members and especially Division of Professional Affairs members, that's out there, and you can provide some input.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. I think that is the end of the completion segment of the PBE podcast, Mr. Mike Rains.
And I hope to see you at the AAPG SEG convention. Looking forward to everything that develops there with the AAPG and just the society. I'm looking forward to how many people show up and what happens there. I think we'll be there. We're certainly going to work hard to be there. So
yeah, I'm going to try to be there too. And that's where the Mars Society is located, and the year 22 is the 50th anniversary of the only geologist to ever walk on the moon, Harrison Jack Schmitt. So don't know if the AAPG Astrogeology Committee is going to have a celebration in Denver, or if that might be the next year back in Houston, but stay tuned for that. Watch out for it. There might be something there to make it even more fun to go to the AAPG SEG convention in Denver.
Cool. Always fun. We'll definitely. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
It's been a pleasure. Great talking to you, Mike.
Yeah. You too, Skip.
You are tuned in to the PBE podcast, where we're taking new information, applying it to new real-world applications to make discoveries. We got to stop and take a minute and thank our sponsors, BRT Energy Advisors, Better Reservoir Technologies, results without the BS. We've had Alan on our show, and I can tell you from experience, he definitely has seen seismic from around the world, including, of course, right here in the Permian Basin. If you are in the E&P business and you want to use seismic data to increase the value of your assets, or if you want to drill safer wells at lower costs using seismic, then you got to get a hold of Alan Bertain and work with his team at BRT Energy Advisors. If you check out our podcast from episode 70, you'll see that not only he understands geophysics, business, and people, but he also explains complicated subjects in a clear and simple way. Visit them at www.brtenergy.com/PBE.